So there's a time that I wasn't thinking about thinking. I was just purely conscious at that moment. I was just the awareness. That's probably one of the best days of my life. So I wasn't really thinking about the fact I was watching Barcelona versus Bilbao in the Spanish Super Cup final. I was just there with you, experiencing everything as transitory appearances in consciousness. So
sounds like a mystical experience in which you transcended your ego.
I really think it was. It almost feels like I put that in there just to set up a segue into starting talking about this book.
Go on then, kick it off.
Oh, you hate starting on this.
You've always got the physical copies. I'll pick up my Kindle.
There we go. Nice. Yeah, so today talking about our speak listening, Sam Harris, Waking Up. And on front it says, Searching for Spirituality Without Religion. So Sam Harris has written a number of different books. He's a neuroscientist from America. And he also runs an app called Waking Up as well, which is a meditation app, which is really great. And I use it daily, and I've been using it daily for probably the past 6 months. And yeah, it's great. It has lots of ongoing lessons, lots of Q&As and interviews with other spiritual teachers. But the main purpose of this book is his angle on, I suppose, meditation and the nature of consciousness. It's
Yours got a different subtitle.
Read.
Mine says, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion.
Mine says Searching for Spirituality Without Religion. Anyway.
Must be the Australian edition.
That's it. Simplified.
They don't like guides over there.
Cool. So, what's talk to me about how you first came across this book. I'd be really interested, and I'm also trying to remember whether you recommended it to me or not.
I remember getting into like Sam Harris, not through meditation or anything, but through like atheism back when I was like into Richard Dawkins and that, and I was about 18 or 19. So there was like, they call them the Four Horsemen. You got Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens. All these guys that brought out books based around atheism at the same time. And I guess, I don't know. I mustn't have known he was into meditation and stuff then, but maybe maybe it was later on. He probably brought some. It was probably podcasts I was listening to him on something when he might have been searching for some guided meditation and saw he was doing that. And then I read this book about 2 years ago, but I remember at the time I was meaning to have read it for like a few years before, just hadn't got around to it. So it's hard to pinpoint it, but I think it's like I found him from two different angles. I had my atheism phase and found him through that, and then I was going through my spiritual meditation phase and found him again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the book kind of rides this line of sort of being a guide to meditation and the nature of consciousness and his understanding of it and a way that we can think about it. But also into that as well is some, I suppose, quite atheistic themes. And
the subtitle is A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion.
Yeah, so it does touch on that a fair bit throughout the book, and it's I think I guess you get a lot of his angle on religion throughout it, but I guess the bit I latched onto most was his, like, the principal subject of the book, that the feeling that we call I is just an illusion, and it's an appearance in consciousness. So I guess to describe it a bit more, he says that the self that we think is behind our eyes looking out at the world is just another appearance in consciousness, and that most of the suffering we have in our life is when we identify with our thoughts and we don't see them as just simple appearances in consciousness. And he really highlights the way we think about experiences like defines how we think about them. So the way we feel about experiences is how we we think about them, and by looking at the sense of the thing that we call the self, it can be eliminated as well, which I imagine we'll get onto later on.
Yeah. I think I might start with like where he started in terms of like laying the foundation. When I know this probably isn't, but it is in the religious stuff, because he kind of opens by talking about how talking about the different religions and how there's a sort of modern, even within the atheist kind of realm, there's a sort of modern, I guess they would see themselves as tolerant perspective that, well, all religions are sort of equal. And he's basically saying, well, they're not, but they all assert very different beliefs and doctrines and practices, and that those beliefs and doctrines and practices can take you more or less towards truth or happiness. So therefore they can sort of be ranked.
And moral goodness as well. We talked about the moral landscape, and he's been criticized openly for going against like Islam and attacking Christianity and things, comparing them on different levels of kind of I suppose destruction they can cause.
It's funny that he's sort of he's towing this line where like atheists probably don't really like him because or like the typical atheist community, where it's like where he's gone off a bit woo-woo, they might perceive that way, into like spirituality, meditation, like transcending the ego and all that, and also this idea of claiming that different religions can be ranked on their virtue and on their pragmatic value. But then obviously none of the religious people like him either, because he's sort of debunking all their beliefs. So it's like there's not much of a pool left of people he can really sell to. But I guess there is, because he's very popular. But like, it's funny how you can annoy two crowds that don't intertwine with one another.
I hadn't thought about that, but he's got a certain way of writing that's really enticing. I don't know if you found that. Like, I really enjoy the way he writes. He's very believable and convincing, and he's got good humor as well.
He's so specific and clear, but also not in like an academic, where like a sentence can be 5 lines long and you forget what the start of it by the time you get to the end of it. It's very like intellectual but clear and concise.
Absolutely. And it's like a 200-page book with an incredible amount of like profound ideas in there. Whereas I've read like 450-page books and felt like it was dragging. Whereas this is just like every page is just full of goodness and lots of really interesting ideas. I'm on
a flow. So basically he's saying that within this like rank order of religions and whatnot, there's a baby in the bathwater in terms of the Eastern religions, within Buddhist and Hindu traditions. And like, if you wipe away all their beliefs about karma and the cosmos and the metaphysics, there's actually a spiritual practice within that, and a truth about your subjective nature, not necessarily about the universe, but about you and your psychology, which is actually wise and useful and helpful. And I guess the whole book is basically saying, like, I've plucked this baby out the bathwater. We're not getting rid of all of this, because there's a nugget of gold in here which we can latch onto.
And he seems really passionate about it as well. Like it seems like he's found something that works for him that's kind of really I guess just changed the way he entirely thinks about suffering and thoughts and the nature of consciousness. And I can just tell he's really eager to share that with the world. And I guess it kind of comes through in the meditation app. He's got a very clear idea of what he's trying to communicate as well. That, the sense, like particularly around, the the nature of consciousness and the sense of self, but the sense that there's an I sitting behind our eyes looking out at the world is an illusion. He'd really, like, that's his real key message, isn't it? Would you, I guess I gave a crack at explaining what his key principle of the book was. I feel like I kind of reeled it out quite quickly at the beginning. I'd be interested to know whether you agreed with that or whether you could maybe simplify what I said in your version.
So I think the practice he's teaching and wanting people to use is what's traditionally called Vipassna. And within that are two sort of self-discoveries. So Vipassna is like, we might call it mindfulness. It's but it's a bit more to it than that. But it's a type of meditation where you don't use imagery. You're not walking along a beach. You're not thinking about focusing on thoughts. You're purposely looking at your experience of the here and now.
Yeah.
And the first stage of that is basically what has been troped out a lot in the past few years. You see posters for it everywhere. They probably, they do it in schools and hospitals or in the workplaces, which is just slowing down, like concentrating on your breath, noticing your experience. And let's say noticing your thoughts for what they are, which are thoughts. And like we talked about in the last podcast, they're not necessarily true or real or threats. They're just bits of language and images in your mind.
Transitory.
And so that's the first part, but that's what he would still call as dualistic. So by dualistic, I mean that there's still a bit of you watching that thing. So there's like two parts of you. So there's your thoughts, and then there's your witness to your thoughts. Now, a step beyond that, which he's saying is maybe you could call it ego transcendence or
self-transcendence.
Yeah, the illusion of the self is that actually there's this ever-present feeling which we're so wrapped up in all the time we might not even realize it's there. It's like a fish in water that doesn't know what water is. We could call that the self or the ego, but it's basically this feeling that you kind of live an inch or two behind your eyes in the center of your head, and that there's a sense that it's so hard to put into words, isn't it?
Yeah, you're like maybe that you're the thinker of your thoughts.
Yeah,
I think that's quite a key part of it. Like that there's someone sitting behind your eyes who's thinking the thoughts, whereas what he's saying is like they just appear in the single consciousness, as opposed to like you and just the dualistic side of it, you and yourself.
And that there's subject and object. So if I'm looking at this glass, it feels like there's me behind my eyes, and then there's a glass out here in external reality. When actually, if I'm to really purely look at my experience, all I have is consciousness. Like I just have this
and its contents.
This sense that there just is, and there's no ego transcendence. Would be like there's no distinction between object and subject. Like for example, if you had a bit of tinnitus and you had some ringing in your ears, and you were also listening to the birds singing outside at the same time, you might feel like you would probably conceptualize, well, there's this noise that's mine and it's coming from within me, and then there's this noise that's coming from out there. But really, like that's a thought. That's us breaking it down. If we were to just experience the pure experience, they're one and the same thing.
Something I found useful in his explanation was around the idea of like psychological continuity. And he says that I guess going off the back of what you're saying around the dualistic, that it's not like us and then the world outside. They're not two separate things. But basically, that like it's useful for us to have psychological continuity because as a content of that consciousness is our memories of what it's like to be us, like our autobiographical memories. So like as an appearance in consciousness, we like have memories of what it was like to be a child and what it's like to have gone to work yesterday and what it's like to remember who our partner is or what we have to do tomorrow. Like there's like that is useful, and I guess they're all kind of stored in in your brain, but it's not necessarily something that we need to pay absolute full attention to. Like there's some part of that that's automatic that is useful for us to know, so we don't kind of wake up and we think we're somebody else. It's not about kind of totally. It's not about like totally detaching from the memory of who you are and what's important to you. It's more that like recognizing that they are just like there's consciousness and its contents, and they're just transitory appearances throughout that. And he's saying by seeing that, you can take a step back and I suppose like relieve suffering, stops you from attaching to your thoughts and thinking that you are the thinker of your thoughts. It gets a bit tied up. This is right on the precipice of my the limit of my understanding. So I'm trying to explain it best I can. Yeah.
Well, I think as well, it's not just understanding. It's like we're trying to put words to like conceptless experience, but obviously words are concepts. So as soon as you start doing that, you can start talking gibberish. And I think that's like been talked about throughout time. But I think so. There's a useful distinction when you're talking about memories, and there was sort of I don't know if it was a whole chapter or just a section on the self, and it was like, well, there's this you could say, you could have a definition of the self. It is like your identity. It's like, well, I grew up here. This is my family. This is my like ethnicity. This is my culture. This is the football team I support, whatever it is. But that's not what we're talking about in terms of transcending the self. Like that, you could call that personhood. But he gave the example of like, imagine waking up with that like soap opera amnesia. We just don't remember any of that stuff. You don't remember your name, who your family are, where you're from, any of that. But there's still this sense that you're an I. There's still a feeling that you're a self and that you kind of live probably an inch behind your eyes. And that's the self he's talking about that can be transcended.
Yes. The self he's talking about isn't the same as self-recognition or self-awareness or, as we said, like memory. And there's a bit I just wanted to touch on in the second chapter in The Mystery of Consciousness. He says that the reality of consciousness is that it is subjective to us, so it's experienced as what it is like to be us. Yeah, that's how he describes it, and I thought that was. It is hard to verbalize this or find words for what he's describing. I guess he's done a lot of the work in doing that. But, it's a tricky one, and I don't think I'd ever heard it explained like this before. So I'm giving it a second read. It's really it was helpful in, I suppose, deepening my meditation practice to revisit this book and kind of go back to those concepts because. Yeah, it can be easy to forget.
He talks about the conscious, like he really emphasizes the point that consciousness is all we have. Like, even if he goes into the bit of the philosophy of theory of mind, and people saying, well, who knows if any of this really exists? We could be a brain in a vat, or we could be under the spell of an evil demon who's manipulating our experience just to make it feel like there are other people and there's a world around us, or we could be living in the Matrix, any of these thought experiments. But you're saying even if any of that were true, even if I was a brain in a vat in the Matrix, like there's still something what it's like to be a brain in the vat in the Matrix. Like even if this is all a computer simulation, I'm still experiencing something, and like that's undeniable, and that's consciousness, and that's all we have. Like that's happiness and joy and connection and our thoughts. It's everything. It's our sensations. There's nothing else.
Yeah, you did that thought experiment, didn't you? Where imagine, you broke it down like imagine you were sent to Mars, but your body was deconstructed, and you were rebuilt in Mars, but there'd still be an experience of what it's like to be you. An experience of what it's like anyway. I'm interested to know what you think about the role of thinking within this in terms of making decisions, and we spoke about in last week in the happiness trap around paying attention to thoughts that are helpful, not necessarily judging them as good or bad or true or false, but paying attention to what's helpful. And I suppose with this in mind, that he's explaining that thoughts are transitory experiences. The thought that you are an I is also a transitory experience, appearance in consciousness. Like, what role does thought play in making the most of our life? Because it's quite common for people to think that your thoughts direct all of your behavior, you're the one making the decisions behind your life. And he says it can be quite confronting for some people to realize that they're not the person controlling their thoughts, and therefore it leads to them not feeling like they're controlling their decisions in life. Wondering whether that's something you'd thought about in reading this book. Like, if thoughts are just transitory experiences, then why bother paying attention to them? Or how do we decide which ones are useful to work on?
I'm not sure I'm quite following you. So I can riff on what I think you might mean, and then if I've got the wrong end of it. So for most adults, most of the time, we're just in thoughts almost all the time, like without really realizing it. And I think one definition he had of the ego was that it's that feeling of thinking without knowing you're thinking. So he talks even about early stage meditators. You might say, oh well, just set a timer for 1 minute and try to focus on your breath without and see what thoughts come up. And they might be like, I focused on the breath for a minute, no thoughts arose. And it might take a few weeks before they actually realize, oh no, I'm thinking all the time. And like,
that's a huge first step.
Like the biggest first step is to actually realize that you're lost in thought almost all the time. And so finding a place in you and building a practice in which you can be aware of those actually gives you some sort of choice as to whether they're helpful or not. Without that awareness, I almost see it as you have less autonomy. Like you're before mindfulness and before recognizing your thoughts for what they are, you're just at the whims of whatever arises in you.
You're vulnerable, aren't you? Yeah.
So, I think I experience more a higher level of I don't know if autonomy is the right word, but like a higher level of I'm not just at the whims of my ego and the thoughts I'm having, the feelings I'm having.
Spontaneity, maybe you've got more choice with what you want to do with those thoughts.
Rather than just feeling like you must live them out.
And that's what
I
he would
think that's
probably
different
refer.
to what you were saying, but that's what it triggered in me.
Yeah. No. Okay. No. That was helpful. I think that runs. I think. I guess that links a bit to what he's said a bit about cognitive fusion. In Russ Harris said in cognitive fusion last week. When we're so attached to our thoughts that we think that our thoughts are true, we think that they're reliable, they're valuable to us. Like that's typical cognitive fusion. Like thinking without thinking. Like so lost in your thoughts that you're not able to kind of step back and make a choice. There's a quote I wanted to read out that I enjoyed. It was in the last chapter. It is embracing the contents of consciousness in any given moment is a powerful way of training yourself to respond differently to adversity.
Yeah.
And if we're able to relax, accept things as they are, as we strive to change ourselves. That was quite a nice balanced way of putting it. He said he's not denying that like thoughts are useful in solving problems and getting things done and achieving anything in life. He's just saying, being able to like step back, see things clearly, and then using thoughts to make the changes necessary, and basically like changing your inner, changing your state before making a decision, which is kind of relates a lot to expansion and
the
previous book.
I think, what was I going to say? In both mindfulness, which is like just witnessing yourself, and the ego transcendence, where it's almost that non-dualistic recognition that object and subject is a concept which you can overcome. I don't think either of those necessarily mean you don't think either. It's just your sort of relationships to those thoughts are different. You're not identified with them. I think there's perhaps a misconception that to be mindful you must be free of thought, when actually you can be mindful of thoughts in the same way you can be mindful of watching a candle or a bird flying past you, or but I think that's perhaps where you were coming from earlier. It's like when a bird flies past you, you're not identified with it. You don't feel like you created it. Whereas perhaps we do feel like we create our thoughts. And actually, I think I've heard, I don't know if this was from the book or not, but I've heard him say something like, okay, think of a film.
Me right now?
Yeah.
Chicken Run.
And so like to what degree, like, were you free to make that choice? Like that you're only free to make to choose one of a number of films that might have ran through your head. I don't know if that was the first one that came to mind, or whether 2 or 3 came to mind and you picked that one. But you weren't free, for example, to say choose The Godfather 2 if it didn't come to your mind.
If it didn't, something you'd never heard of or had never crossed your
or even
mind,
if you have, but it just in that moment, if it didn't come to your consciousness, you're not free to choose it. And I don't know if that's where you were getting to earlier when you were talking about like the lack of autonomy in your thoughts, or.
Yeah, I think what I was more referring to is, like that we shouldn't negate our thoughts. We shouldn't ignore them. This isn't about ignoring thoughts and just watching them just come and go without finding any use in them.
Right.
He's not.
Right.
He's not denying the thoughts are useful, and it is sometimes useful to have a sense that, as I said, have that like psychological continuity. Like those are useful things. But he's saying like, I guess this is the way I saw it, that this is just a useful and really, I guess, deep viewpoint to have in life, that you can step back from those and it's quite a relief to know that you're not attached to your thoughts, or that you're not necessarily constructing every decision you make. That it can be a bit of a relief to have that in your life. Something I wanted to speak about, and he talks about this, is that this isn't necessarily a state to be achieved. This state of of consciousness, of just awareness. It's something that can be glimpsed in an ongoing manner. So he talks about you can see this in the click of a finger and the blink of an eye, and that's something I found was useful throughout from doing the meditations on his app, that you get those little glimpses of what it's like to step back from that sense of self and take this isn't a continuous state to be in. It's something that you can kind of glimpse at various moments.
Yeah. And there are kind of these legends of yogis or gurus who have reached persistent state of enlightenment, but yeah, like more realistically, you can just notice in a flash the sense of egolessness. I feel like because I've spent a lot of time, probably since discovering acceptance commitment therapy, like we talked about last time, practicing mindfulness. But in terms of this dualistic mindfulness, like I'm like body scans, like, okay, so I'm sat on the cushion, I'm noticing the sensations in my toes and my heels, up my legs, noticing the sensation of my breath. I do like a full body thing. Then I might notice the sounds I can hear in my environment. Even with my eyes closed, I'll notice my visual field, like what's going on the backs of my eyelids, that sort of thing. But this is, and which can be very good for you, apparently, and very calming and relaxing and peaceful, not to be lost in thought. Because when you're fully concentrated on sensation and you keep practicing that skill of getting lost in thought, noticing you're lost and coming back to sensation, apparently that's really good. I don't knock it, and it's and I still do it a lot, and it's a lot easier than ego transcendence. But there's this like second level, right, which is what this book's more talking about. Which is the bit of you that feels like, when I'm on the cushion concentrating on my big toe, the bit of me that feels like I'm up here and my toes down there, like that's an illusion, because there's nothing special about the sensation of my vision or thinking that my thoughts are in my head that means that they should be up and my toes should be down away from my ego. Like that's just that's still an illusion I'm living in, even when I'm doing that mindfulness exercise. So it's more recently that I've been practicing this more ego transcendent stuff. Like on his app, he's got a few. There's that one with mirrors, and I don't know if you've done any of those.
Yeah, I've done those. Yeah, the ones based on Douglas Harding's notion of having no head, of headlessness. Yeah. Did you find that part of the book interesting?
Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite bits. Yeah.
I'd love to know why. Yeah, I found it initially very confusing, and I didn't quite get it, so I had to read that chapter a couple of times. And when I first read it, now having done some of the exercises, getting the ones where you're pointing the finger back at yourself, and just getting this sense of headlessness, that you're not just like looking out from behind your eyes. I guess it's an interesting. He describes it as like a way of glimpsing that selflessness. Transcending the ego. And in my experience, it's something that is happened in very short, sharp glimpses, but it's a hell of a, like, I don't even know whether to call it a feeling or not, but it's a very interesting sensation to feel like you have no head. But anyway, why did you enjoy the chapter? I'd love to know.
It was, I guess, for want of a better word, eye-opening. I guess with the building up to it, the like theory of mind stuff and the consciousness and subject objects distinction. I guess and there was, like, he talks about split brain patients. It's stuff I've come across before in sort of studying psychology, philosophy and stuff, whereas this more practical instruction into, like, by this chapter, this Douglas Harding headlessness stuff, I can't remember which chapter it is, but there's a certain amount of time where you're feeling like you're reading a book, and then it gets to a point where it feels like you're having an experience. Like, it's like every paragraph you're practicing what he's sort of talking about as you're reading it. So it's like, it's not just reading by that point, it's an experiential exercise. And so there was a can't remember, it was some physicist, wasn't it, drew a self-portrait of themselves, obviously self-portrait, from their first person perspective. So it was just like with one eye closed, it was like the edge of their nose, the ridge of their eye, like the bottom half of their leg and trouser, and then just, their living room. It was a self-portrait from the first person perspective. And I guess Douglas Harding took that and used it as sort of a meditative tool to look for your head from your perspective, which obviously you can't see because your eyes are in it. But from your first person perspective, you have no head. Like, you can have a hand if you stick it up there, but you can't glimpse your own head.
And in doing the finger pointing exercises and some of the mirror exercises, real interesting glimpses into that. I've from my experience, I've had, in the mornings when I meditate, I do just out of just the way my room's structured, I end up doing it in front of a mirror. So I find a lot of the time I'm closed-eyed, my meditations. But I found after doing some of the exercises in his meditations, trying to look for what's looking and get that sense that, well, the sense of self is an illusion and I'm just consciousness and its contents. Like, in opening my eyes up again and looking at the mirror, looking back at myself, sometimes I can see myself very differently. Like, there's almost this kind of, I don't know how to describe it without sounding weird, but like, I'm looking at the mirror back at myself, but I've got this kind of empty, hollow feeling, like I'm almost not looking back at me as a shape back in the mirror. It's just kind of, I almost can't put words to it. But
I've had the experience of meditating in the mirror and it, like, flicking between it, feeling like me and then looking like I'm looking at someone else. I don't know if that's at all related to what you're talking about.
Yeah, kind of similar to maybe like looking through a window, and sometimes you can look back at it as a mirror, but sometimes you're looking out to the like outside, like looking through glass. I kind of get that sort of flickering between the two. Sometimes I'm like, okay, that's me looking at me in the mirror. Other times I just kind of feel like, the mirror's looking back at me and I'm the reflection. I don't know how to. It's these incredible hard things to put words to, but basically just it makes it kind of cuts through my ego. That's the baseline of it. But I don't feel like I'm the subject looking out at the world. I'm just that even just the way we use language as well is particularly confusing. But I just am, and it's not me constructing anything. It's just is.
At the so I can bring an experience which I've had in the last couple of minutes. So I'm looking at a screen and I can see you. Well, like the projection of you and the projection of me. And most of the time, if I'm not really, if I'm just in the flow or whatever, I'm very identified with my image of me. When actually, from my first person perspective, there's no reason why my image and your image should feel any differently. And like, I can, even right now, I'm sort of meditating on experiencing that kind of headlessness,
Mm.
and I'm getting glimpses of my image and your image having sort of equal value, and flicking between that, and then suddenly feeling identified with my image.
He talks about that in the book, does it, around when we make well, not necessarily about that, but when we make eye contact with strangers in the street, it can sometimes give us like an acute awareness of who we are, like that self-consciousness. I found that interest, like that's I've just found that something interesting, even today, like glimpsing eye contact with people, that awkward, you look at them briefly and they look away, like he's encouraging you to kind of like hold the gaze a little bit longer. And I found that as well as a glimpse into my headlessness, that like someone, it's almost like I'm putting myself in their shoes, I guess.
Yeah.
Like they're the one.
Yeah.
Like it takes me out of myself by realizing that I'm not the one looking out.
Yeah. There's no one looking out. It just is.
There's no one looking. Yeah, it just is. Yeah. That's just an illusion.
He has a walking meditation on the app, and
it's too slow for me.
We
talked about slow walkers on this before.
You'd hate to be behind me while I'm doing that. And there's like a state you can get in when you sort of, when you're walking with this meditation in mind, where when you're like in your ego, it feels like you're moving through space, but like when you get that glimpse, it doesn't, it just feels like stuff is rushing at you. Like you're in a car, you can have that.
Yeah.
Or when you're on a train and one train moves and you're not sure if it's yours or the one next to you, and you have that like flash between feeling like you're moving and feeling like the other thing's moving.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like when you have that glimpse of selflessness, it suddenly feels like trees are coming at you rather than you moving through them. And if you get in that, I got in that place and someone was moving towards me, and it feels like they could just come straight through you. But obviously, and it's not until a bit later, like, oh, I better get out of the way, because they're obviously going to hit something.
It's actually, we've never really spoken about this at any length, I know, and it's really like fascinating to hear what your experience is with this. Because, and I guess to preface like what, just before we keep going, is like for everyone listening and to anyone who starts to experience this, like this is a deeply like personal experience, really, and it's that's why it's so hard to describe what's going on. So I'm loving hearing your experience of it, because I've had moments where I have done a couple of the walking ones, but not the slow one. I did the other.
You can do it fast. You don't need to do it slow.
Yeah, but I guess moments where I've glimpsed that selflessness, I feel a real. For me, it's like the edges of my body, like my skin, isn't where my body stops. Almost, it feels like I'm this kind of expanding. How to describe it? This expanding space, just very light, very very open, very spacious, and I kind of stop feeling like the weight of my body almost. That it's not like I'm not kind of like pushing down on the ground, or like gravity's not, pushing me to the floor or something like that. My feet aren't rooted to the ground. It's kind of, everything becomes very light and it can start to feel a bit spacey, what I typically describe as that. And that's particularly interesting. And then especially if you're out in nature and there's kind of like, I don't know, maybe leaves blowing around on trees, or there's wind going across the grass, or people coming past you, it can start to feel like you're not separate from those things.
Yeah.
Which every time up until reading this book and practicing meditation, I thought just sounded like woo-woo. But then I guess in doing it, it's really nice. I think it's quite a relief. It's you're not thinking about like what's happening tomorrow or your worries, or even if that thought does come up again in that moment, it's something you can step a bit further away from. I don't attach to, my worry about what's happening at work tomorrow or something. I just kind of just see it as just something that's just passing through me and coming out the other side.
There's also a sensation of distance which can disappear. So like if you meditate with eyes open on an object, like I was doing it the other day on a plant in my garden, which, metaphysically was about 10 feet away, but experientially, with enough sort of, you get to a point where it's almost like a flatter experience of the visual field, because your like distance sort of starts to, your concept of distance, which I guess you must learn as an infant, where you've got two eyes and it can work out that this is closer to me than this, this microphone is closer to me than the computer and that. But through sort of meditating on it, it feels like everything sort of almost more 2D, similar. And there is no gap between you and stuff. It's just one.
Yeah. I identify with that.
I had it the other day as well when I was. We got this basketball backing, which is like this sort of checkered gate. So it's like this metal railing which you can see through. But I was like doing stretches on it, so the railing was like right here, and then I could see like houses in the distance behind it. And suddenly it sort of all came as one, and I lost the distance of either of them.
Something happened to me recently was I went a walk down by this lake, by this river near me, and there's these, on the other side of the river there was this big like mud bank, so it's almost like a cliff, the other side of the water, and there was trees growing out of it, and they were all kind of like, when you look at it, it seemed very flat and very maybe I'm having the opposite experience to you. It seemed very flat and two-dimensional, but like when I looked at it, the trees growing out of it suddenly became a lot more vivid. I was able just to kind of, the detail of it and the variety of the leaves and the twigs coming out of the mud all started to kind of become a lot more vivid and a lot more trying to describe, like became a lot more alive. I felt like very connected to it, even though it was just kind of like a bank of trees growing out of the side of that. Yeah. And I went down there with a friend a couple of actually this was a week I went down there like with a friend. I said, man, I sometimes sit here and just stare at this cliff with all these like trees and things growing out of it. And he's like, I never noticed that. Like he hadn't seen it like that before. But then when I got him to look at it and slow down, he was able to identify it. Anyway, I don't know if that's an entirely relevant example, but I think it, in particularly around the not seeing things as separate from yourself, I felt very kind of connected and very close to what I was looking at by paying particular attention to it.
Yeah.
I'll be Oh, go, Nana, please.
I remember before kind of digging into this, I was in this meditation group, and this teacher got us to do this exercise where she has us like hold a triangle in front of us like this, and then look at the triangle, and then slowly peel your hands away, but maintain equal vision on both hands. But as far as you can go, like right to the edge of your visual field. So now you're looking at sort of right on the cusp equally. And I found that quite sort of relaxing at the time and enjoyed it. But I think in hindsight, I can see why that was an exercise, because when you like look for your own head, you're not, when you look for your subject, suddenly everything outside of that has equal value, because usually your ego is sort of focused on something specifically. Like it might be the screen for me right now, or it might be a book I'm looking at, or the plate of food I'm eating from. Like there's always something which
we're drawn to.
Yeah, that Freud would say you're cathected to, that like your attention is zoomed in on something and everything else sort of fades beyond that. Whereas when you're looking for yourself, everything outside of that suddenly has equal value, and your vision sort of softens, and everything right from the top of your vision to the bottom to the sides, it just is relevant as what's in the center.
Is equal to it, yeah. I'm interested to know what your experience of the waking up app has been like. What bits do you enjoy? What have you had any particular experiences due to that app? Do you like certain meditations more than other ones? Yeah, what do you reckon? Any of those?
Yeah, so I mean, I did the first like 50-day course, and then kind of just carried on doing his daily meditations, and now I sort of flip between just meditating without guidance on my own with a timer or something, and then occasionally dipping into it. I think my so yeah, I really like the course in terms of for that guidance to slow down, to get that first level of mindfulness. But that section, I forget the name of the guy who does it, but the one with like the mirrors and the pointing and stuff.
Yeah, based on the Douglas Harding.
Yeah, it's study, like the he calls it the science of the first person, I think, because science is the idea of science is that you're supposed to take out the subject and find things that are objective, but this is like, well, we're gonna like, but you can do your own science of your experience, and so like you're just doing all these experiments with your inner life. I found that one probably most profound.
I think he does like in a lot of the meditations, so he's got a 50-day like introduction to it, I suppose, practice, and then after that there's daily meditations that you could do between like 10 and 20 minutes. I think sometimes I'll find that second level of mindfulness, like trying to like transcend the ego and things. There are some days where I find that it's a bit too much. Like if I'm doing that daily, it can almost feel, I don't know whether it's too challenging. Like it's obviously a very useful reminder, but I think I'm still working up to the point where I can practice that on a daily basis. Sometimes I'm wanting, I guess, different types of meditations, which he does have on the app. There's some around koans. I like the ones Contemplative Action by David White as well. The ones around like some of the poetry he's written, which is, I guess, along the subjects, a lot of what Sam talks about, but put in like this really beautiful poetry. This guy's got this like insane voice. Like his voice is so nice to listen to. And I like the variety on there. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes I find the that trying to extinguish the sense of self isn't something I want to be doing like twice a day, every day. I enjoy the other meditations, like sometimes the walking ones, or the 30-minute ones, or the metta loving kindness ones. I guess it's nice to mix them up. I mean, what do you think about meditation in terms of sticking with just one type? Do you prefer to mix it up and do different ones daily? Do you find you get to a point after a few weeks where maybe you're a bit bored of one type, or I don't know.
I guess, I mean, the sort of glimpsing your egolessness is more new to me, but over the few years, I've always just basically been doing mindfulness, and no, I've never got bored of it. I guess like but it's not like I'm doing the same thing every time. Like sometimes
I'm not saying like bored of the practice. Yeah, the type of, as in if it's the same one you're listening to or something like that.
Right. Well, I probably don't. I'd probably say I listen to a meditation maybe 25% of the time, and the rest of it I'm just sat on my own, like without guidance. And either be on the body or the breath, or I quite like doing the visual field with my eyes closed. Because there's always stuff going on there which you don't think to look at.
remember you telling me that about that years ago. I was like, oh, what are you doing? You're like, you were lying in bed, like we were hanging out. You're like, just meditating. Like, you told me you're describing like looking at the back of your eyelids, and there's like a whole space there to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you don't remember that? Well, I do, so it happened. I guess this is the first time I've tried a lot of different meditation apps, and a lot of them, I guess, were quite dualistic and a lot of like basic mindfulness things. And I think this is the first time I've really latched on to one particular person's meditations. So like I'm really enjoying these so far, and in reading this book, it's kind of deepened my understanding, which will hopefully therefore deepen my practice. And I just really enjoy the way he frames things, but also this new concept of like ego transcendence is something that I'm seeing benefits from. So I'm going to stick with his meditations and try and get as much from this as possible, because I think I'm in a real phase where I'm learning a lot from it.
Yeah, I used John Kabat-Zinn's for a number of years, and I know you just talked about the repeating the same one, but he had this like 45-minute body scan, which is basically the only meditation I did for about 5 years.
Nice.
I'm sure there were others on the internet, but I found one I liked, stuck with it.
Nice.
And then since then I've moved on. My go-to now is the Sam Harris app, and I mean, I know there must be loads of stuff online. I've heard loads of people talk about like Headspace and things, but out of John Kabat-Zinn and Sam Harris, I've just and going to groups like in person, I've never really gone outside of that.
Yeah, what's your experience of going to group guided meditations? Do you enjoy them? Is that something you? But obviously, before COVID, would you be doing those regularly? Would you?
Not regularly. I had a few that maybe they ran for 6 weeks or something like that. I think it helps. I think it's especially good for beginners, because it's so easy, especially when you start, to be like, to just sort of feel a bit irritated and be like, I just want to get a coffee. I'd like sod this. Whereas like, especially if you wanted to do it for a longer amount of time. So if you were to sit in a group for an hour, there's sort of there's a level of commitment you have which you might not have on your own, which I think is helpful.
And it's just nice to be in a room full of other people who are kind of on who have similar intentions to you as well. Yeah.
And then you sort of have a post meditation reflection and hear about people's experiences.
Everyone's drinking green tea. No, that's been my experience as well. I've really when it was open, I'd try and go to meditations in the city. Probably sometimes they would do these like 4-week courses, so like 4 weeks on one subject. They were based on Buddhist teachings, and but I'd go to those. If there's one particular course, I might go weekly, but in general it would be fortnightly or to once a month. And I really enjoyed that. I think it was a good way to, a lot of this you're doing like in the privacy of your own home or in your bedroom or on the bus. I mean, you can meditate anywhere really, but it seems like quite a deeply private, personal thing. And I think there's something nice about sharing that with other people, and I guess feeling part of a more conscious community. And it's just kind of a nice reset for me as well. I think it would always served as, if ever I was beginning to become maybe a little not so disciplined in my practice, or rushing it, or maybe not putting my as much consciousness into it as possible, it was to be around other people, like reinforce that commitment. And I'd always leave feeling pretty good, and pressed a reset button for the next 4 weeks of my life, and good to go again. Nice. I remember the first time I did it, the first time I properly meditated was here in Melbourne. And that was in like 2012, I think, maybe 2013. And I was just like looking for stuff to do. I was just in one of those moods. I was just going to all these like random sports events, going to meditation classes, just trying new things. And I remember the first time I did it, leaving and feeling like I was walking on a cloud when I walked out. It was just like that was probably the moment I decided, like, I need to start meditating, not just because of like just that sensation, but because of I suppose it just gave me a sense of relief that there's like another way of being, and I don't have to attach to my thoughts so much, and I can take a step back. I think I was just in a phase where I was really wrapped up and just there's quite a lot of like maybe pent up energy or a lot of thoughts racing around my head, and it was really nice to, for the first time ever, to take a step back and to realize like, these thoughts aren't me. Like I don't need to pay attention to absolutely all of these, and also just get the relaxation side of it as well.
Yeah, no, I can really relate to that. Because on the one hand, he talks about how, this is a practice. It's like playing the guitar. Like you wouldn't just expect to be able to, strum out a song straight away. It takes time to build up a skill. But on the other hand, those like first experiences, like if you've been like lost in thought for 18 years, to have like the first time you're like, like I can just be concentrated on the here and now, and like that payoff from like that release it's hard to retrieve that again.
It's a very important glimpse, isn't it? I suppose choose what you do with it. Often when I've sent people meditations to try, and a lot of people say like, my thoughts, I've got too many thoughts, and my thoughts just seem to race too much. And I think they'd be the perfect people to persist with and just be like, no, please try it, because if you can have that same glimpse that I had, and it's nice to know it's something like you can continually work on. I'd be interested in just wrapping this up, just to know a bit about how you find that meditating in general has impacted you on a day-to-day basis. What things are you noticing that have helped you or have brought good things to your life, I suppose? What are the positives?
Yeah. Well, but before that, it was something you just said then about someone who says, it's not for me, I think all the time, whatever. I think a really important realization is when you're first trying mindfulness, if let's say you're focusing on your breath or some sensation in your body, and you realize, it's been like 3 minutes and I've just been off thinking about dinner or some conversation I had yesterday. That moment where you notice that that's happened, like that's the practice. That's you, the equivalent of playing a guitar. That's you like practicing a scale. Like each time you notice you've been lost in thought and come back, like that's a really good thing. And it's so common for people to, in that moment, sort of be frustrated or annoyed at themselves that they've been lost in thought for a few minutes. And
that's another thought, and then that you build on that again.
And I really want to like put out there, because I to learn this myself, is like that's the moment to be celebrated. Like if you're like, oh crap, I was in a half an hour meditation for the last 25 minutes, I've been off in thought, then like celebrate the fact that you've now just noticed that that's happened, because that's the exercise. That's the bicep curl of the mind. That's what you're trying to do. So don't be frustrated at yourself when you realize you've been lost in thought, because that realization is the practice.
And for you, I guess to build on that second question I asked, like for you, is that something that you feel you're able to identify with quicker now? There's like the periods of you being lost in thought have shortened. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. I would say over, like as a general, I think it depends on if there's like loads going on. I can still have a day where it's like I put on a meditation, it's like, oh crap, I just thought through most of that. But like, like on the whole, if it's those gaps shortened, and even if thoughts arise, I'm not lost in them as much. Like I can see them without being identified with them more often, not all the time, obviously. Maybe not even most of the time, but like the experience of being connected to something, say your breath in the present, and then a thought coming in without being lost in it, but just it's like that's a cool experience as well, because it's for most of my life before then, I imagine for most people most of the time, thoughts sort of equated with being lost in them, like a daydream. So to notice a thought as it enters, but being aware of it as it's happening is also one of those scales or chords we learn as we're practicing.
Have you found it's helped you in moments of difficulty?
I think it's very helpful in difficult conversations. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Just being able to like pause and take a breath and notice how you're feeling and reconnect with what your intention of the conversation is, and notice your interpretation of what the other person said, and notice it as an interpretation which might be different to what they actually meant.
Yeah.
That's all very helpful.
And what about in moments of I suppose decision making for you? You know, if you've got to make a choice on one thing or another, does it help in that moment?
Yeah, I guess there are different types of decisions. There's sort of those ones that are more immediate, and what comes to mind for that is, say, if I'm working with clients, there's always like 101 things you could say or do in any given moment in response to something someone says. So yeah, I think that being able to pause and notice what my urge is, and without automatically following through with it, perhaps just like passing it through a filter of like is this what I actually want to say, or are you just trying to like fill a gap or like feel more comfortable or something. So those are more like immediate decisions, but then I guess there are sort of decisions in terms of planning for the future which are not so like real time.
But it sounds like it's had a really big impact on your life overall. This practice, I would definitely agree. I think it's it's an invaluable skill to learn, and it's a way of being that I suppose allows you to nip a lot of things in the bud, I suppose, just in regular language, you know, just kind of see things a lot quicker, not get so wrapped up in your thoughts, and I guess make clearer decisions. And I guess when it comes to feelings of worry or anxiety or stress, for me, I'm able to recognize those a whole lot quicker before I start acting in ways that probably aren't what I'd hope. You know, I kind of even today at work, things were like amping up a lot and getting very busy and very very intense. And I literally was just I kind of just took like a deep breath and just kind of like stepped back from everything mentally and just kind of watched it all going around in my head. I'm like, okay, I'm starting to amp up here. I'm starting to feel a bit stressed. Just being able to just step back and then re-enter back into work. It just really changed the outcome of my afternoon, to be honest. Like I could have gone one of a multitude of ways, but in doing that, I was able to, again, similar to a lot of stuff in acceptance and commitment therapy, it allowed me to step back and choose more valued action to carry on with. Real amazing insights.
Yeah, past and the future, just an illusion. Present is all we have. If you're always thinking, the only thing you have left to think about are thoughts. That's my takeaway.
I'm gonna have to think about that.
Don't think about it.
Oh no!
You're lost in your ego again.
Oh God, not again. Oh, cool. So, thanks for today. I've always enjoy these. We're going on to our next book soon, which is called Flow.
Oh, you bought it?
I bought it. Yeah.
It's quick.
Yeah, I definitely.
Oh, go on, mate. Pronounce the name. I challenge you.
Absolutely. So his name is Milai Ciszek Temilhal Yi. Mihale. I'm really sorry, but I thought I'd
show me it again. I did look it up a while ago.
John.
I can't see it. Yeah. Oh, right. It's in the O. Nah, I'm not even going to try it.
Yeah,
I'll say it next time.
Yeah, I think we'll owe him the respect of learning how to pronounce it, and we'll say it next time. I think that's the right thing to do.
That is the right thing to do.
Yeah. It's not all that funny. All right, cool. So this is the book we'll be doing next time. We think it. I'm not going to say it goes really well with the other two books, Flow and talking about the psychology of optimal experience. There we go. So that'll be us in the next couple of weeks, I imagine. So good ones.
See you then.
See you, mate. Nice one.
Stay present.
Will do.